was another guy that our friend introduced us to named Johnny Fratto, whose family was pretty well connected in LA. And like when you went into a restaurant with Johnny, you got like the best seats. We spent the entire day in this Italian restaurant with Henry and Joe Hill, and it was hysterical. I mean, the guy was he's a complete nut. The prosecutor was a friend of mine, and she told me afterwards, she goes, I've never seen anybody do that before. And I'm like, that scared the hell out of me. I mean, he stood up and he looked at me, and he had these like black eyes, and he was just, that was scary. That guy scared me. He scared me a lot. Not long after that, he escaped again. And I thought, oh my God, Arlex is out there. And maybe he's looking for me.
Jon O'Neill, welcome to the show. Happy Independence Day.
Thank you. I guess it's not such a happy day for y'all, but it's a great day. It's a great day for us Americans, and we're having a good 4th so far, as I can tell.
Have you been to any fireworks displays and all that sort of jazz?
Nah, it's not. I don't really do that anymore. They did have a big one here in where I live in Florida last night, but no, it's great to have the day off. It's celebrating our country's birthday, so yeah, we all get a day off, and I'm totally okay with that.
You're gonna spend part of your day off with a Brit. So how fitting.
I have no problem with that.
Good stuff. Well, funny enough, there is something interesting going on in the UK at the moment. It's the election day to elect a prime minister, government. So I've been out to vote, elect my democratic right and all that stuff. So yeah, so it's interesting that's fallen on Independence Day, isn't it? Cool.
I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty ironic. Right, we're here because I read Ramesh Nyberg, who I interviewed, Miami ex-detective, and I saw in the preface of his book, he mentioned your name. So, and he gave you a lot of props and a lot of credit. So I asked him, after the interview, if he would be kind enough to get in touch with you and see if you wanted to come on the show. So you were kind of the other side of probably like a different area of profession than Ramesh, which we'll get to shortly. But if we can just start with your background, please, Jon, and kick off from there, if that's okay.
Sure. Okay. I was born in Miami, born and raised there. My father was a stockbroker, but he was also a pretty well-known fighter pilot in World War II. He flew P-38s in the Pacific, and he was wingman of a pilot named Richard Bong, who was America's #1 ace in the war. And actually, a friend of mine just found Richard Bong's plane, which another pilot had crashed 80-something years ago, and my friend, a buddy of mine, found it in New Guinea, which is a whole nother story. But anyway, my dad was an awesome guy from everything that I know, but he died when I was very young, when I was 6. And my mother raised my sister and I. I have a younger sister. She's a year younger than me. And she raised us in the mid-'60s as a single mom, which was no mean feat. But yeah, I grew up in Miami, and I couldn't have asked for a better place to grow up.
So what was the decades that you grew up in Miami?
I was born in 1960. I grew up, in the 60s there, and the 70s, and then obviously in the 80s is when, I got involved in reporting and all the other things that I was able to do. But when I was a kid in Miami, it was a very quiet town. It was very seasonal. In the winter, there was a lot of people there. In the summer, there was nobody but us. Where I lived, after my father died, we moved to a place that was really literally on the edge of the Everglades. I mean, when I looked out of my backyard toward the west, there was nothing out there. So as a kid, I mean, I had all these fields and places to wander in, and it was very safe. The little enclave where we lived, it was pretty middle class. It was a on our street there were 2 cops and a firefighter. So we always felt very safe, and it was just it was a wonderful experience growing up there during that time. I don't know. I know now that where I live is in the middle of a huge sprawl that goes out miles and miles and miles, toward the west, toward the Everglades. So I don't know how it is for kids there now, but for me it was pretty awesome.
Wow. I take it by your surname, you're second generation, third generation, first generation Irish? Or am I barking the wrong tree with that one?
Yeah. I'm about 3rd generation Irish, and my mother was actually Welsh. So, yeah, I have. I did one of those. I don't know, DNA
Ancestry.
things. And it was like basically you're 99%. English. I mean, Irish and English. There was like no other. No other traces or markers in there at all. So yeah, but I'm pretty proud of that heritage. It's not bad.
No, it's all right, isn't it? So, funny enough, you say about the Everglades. The thing that I think about the Everglades is crocodiles. I take it there's loads of them there. I've got a phobia against crocodiles, and I'll tell you why later when we get onto your reporting days. So, okay. What was and it was down to Miami. What was your schooling like, John? Were you a smart kid? You enjoy it?
I did okay in school, and I was also a competitive swimmer. Both my sister and I, something my mom did to help, give us something to do. Not have dad and everything. That was one of her solutions to that issue was have male coaches in our lives and stuff, and it worked out pretty well. But by the time I got to high school, I just couldn't get into it anymore. I dropped out of high school right after 10th grade. Although I did during that 10th grade year, I did work on the high school newspaper, and that was actually the first time I ever wrote something that was published with my name on it was for the high school newspaper in like 1975 or something. And it was about a new show that had just come on that everybody was talking about called Saturday Night Live.
Oh yes, that's big over here as well. Yeah. So yeah. Why? Because I guess journalism now, if someone drops out of school early, it'd be very, very difficult to get into journalism. Probably need degrees and this, that, and the other. How did you manage to get into it? When you dropped out of school.
Well, that's. I got into it by doing it, and by being willing to do it, and that's that sort of evolved from some other things that I was doing at the time. But nobody ever asked me, not once, even when I was hired at the Miami Herald in 1989. I did not have a college degree. And all I had was basically a graduate equivalency diploma, which is what you get here when you drop out of high school and you still want to, go to college. You have to get one of those to go. But nobody ever asked me, mainly because by the time the Herald hired me, I'd already been reporting for a couple of years, and I had done some things, and I had shown that I could do the job, and they chose me, and I was forever grateful for that, because once I started writing, that's where I wanted to go, and that's where everybody wanted to go. So I was really lucky to end up there.
So from when you dropped out of high school to when you joined the Herald, what were you doing then? I take it you were writing somewhere.
No, I wasn't actually. I started out, I dropped out of high school mainly because at the time I was 16 and I was playing in a band and I was working at a record store, and in my fevered teenage brain I figured, hey, life doesn't get much better than this. What do I need to go to school for? Of course, all that stuff ended and I had to go back to the real world. And I discovered the airline industry. And in 1979, I started working in the airline industry. And for a 19, 20-year-old kid to have access to airplanes and to be able to go wherever you wanted, traveling back in those days is nothing like it is today. I mean, there were literally dozens of airlines and you could go pretty much anywhere. And so that's what I did for about 5 years. And the only problem with the industry at that time in the early 80s, if you know anything about it, is there was a lot of the airlines industry had just been deregulated in the U.S. and a lot of these startup airlines would come and go. So I went through 3 airline bankruptcies, and I decided, I think I need to do something else. And what occurred to me, because I had done some community college, and of course when I went to community college, I started working on the newspaper, mainly because that helped get me through that horrible year of high school that I endured before I dropped out. And so I thought, well, maybe I should try being a journalist. Maybe I should try writing. So I had stayed in touch with some friends, and they told me about a program that a newspaper in Miami. It was called the Miami News. At the time, there were 2 newspapers. The Miami Herald was the big one, and they were the morning paper, and the Miami News was the smaller one, and it was the afternoon paper. But they had a guy there who would, if you would be willing to come in and take assignments, he would edit and teach you. And they would pay you, it was like, I don't know, $10 a story, whatever, to do this. And a friend of mine told me about it, and I went in, and sure enough, the guy said, okay, if you want to do it, here's a story. And I wrote my first story, and it ended up on the front page, not because of how good it was, but because of the subject that, this guy had given me. And I thought,
what was it?
It was about back in, I guess this was 85, I want to say, Coca-Cola company introduced something called New Coke. They got rid of the old formula, whatever, and brought in, everybody hated it. So they brought back it was called Coca-Cola Classic. And this was the day that they made that announcement. So what they did was they said, well, go out to, these supermarkets and interview people and ask them what they think of this. So that's what I did. So I wrote this story, and actually my friend, a guy named Jeff Kleinman, who had told me about this program, I couldn't think of a lead for the story. So I called him in a panic, and I'm like, I don't know what to write. I'm here in the newsroom and I don't know what to write. And he gave me a lead, which was brilliant. I still remember what it was. And I put it on the story and wrote the story, and the guy came and edited it, and he said, hey, I hope you keep coming back, because I would like to work with you. And that's how my actual journalism career got started.
So was it like a niche paper?
No, it was a daily paper. It was we were competitive with the Herald. We were the afternoon paper. Back in those days, they actually delivered papers to your house in the afternoon. I mean, some of this stuff, when you think about it now, it just seems like kind of quaint, but no, it was the Miami News actually was a very good newspaper. I mean, it was smaller, but they had some outstanding journalists there. I mean, some people I work with there were just, they were just amazing, absolutely, and they were always willing to teach me something, mainly because I was so interested in it. I wanted to learn more about it because it was, the airline business was awesome, and I got to travel all over the world, which is great. But this was really cool because it was like a different thing every day, and you had to learn about something or someone in several hours, and then take that information and explain it to a general audience, which is really not that easy to do. You're a storyteller. I'm sure you know the challenges of that. So I was really, I was smitten with it, and I I couldn't think of anything else that I wanted to do.
So what years were you at the Miami News?
From okay, well, I bounced around a little bit. I was there I worked there in 1985 on that correspondent program, and then I got promoted to the business desk, and I was actually in the newsroom the day the Challenger exploded, which was like I've never seen anything. Like everybody just like lost their minds because, you know, here's this teacher going up into space and the thing blows up on national TV and everybody just lost their minds. So I got drafted in to help with the coverage, and it was literally a stop the press kind of thing, which I just thought was like movie stuff. But they literally stopped the presses because this happened right before our deadline for the afternoon paper and in the middle of the, you know, late morning. So I was there, and then they made me the police reporter, and I did that for about a year, and then I got an offer from a friend of mine in the airline industry to come back, which I did. I worked for Continental Airlines for like almost 3 years as operations manager. That was a lot of fun. Got to travel some more. I spent a lot of time in London when I was there, and then the news. The woman who replaced me as a cop reporter, she wanted to leave. I forget why. Maybe she's getting married or I don't know something. But anyway, so they called me and said, "Would you want to come back and be a reporter?" And at the time, I was just so fed up with. Continental was not in a good place in those days in the late 80s. I mean, if you know anything about a guy named Frank Lorenzo, it was just a lot of turmoil, and it was very, very difficult. And so I thought, you know what, screw the aviation industry. I'm going to go back to reporting. And I mean, you know, how lucky was I that just happened in that way? I mean, I didn't seek out the jobs. I was, you know, I probably would still be at Continental if they hadn't called me. But this was in early 1988. I went to the Miami News, and I worked there. And then, of course, in October of 1988, the Miami News announced that they were going to shut down publication, and basically we were all out of jobs. So that's when I was lucky enough to get hired by the Herald. I mean, I didn't miss a paycheck. I was one of the lucky ones, because a lot of my colleagues, many of whom were better journalists than I, you know, had to struggle for a little bit. Eventually, most of them ended up there at the Herald, which was great. But I was in that first group, and I was very lucky to be involved in that.
So how did the Herald, because funny enough, I've heard of the Miami Herald, I haven't heard of the Miami News. Well, I guess maybe I would have been 10 when it closed, so I probably wouldn't have. But what was the difference like between working on the News and the Herald?
Well, I mean, obviously the deadlines were different. The newsroom was smaller at the News. But really, I mean, the Herald was really just bigger. When I joined the Herald, I worked for a publication called Neighbors, which was their community news section. Very, very popular community news section. But that was my main job. I was the police reporter for the South Miami-Dade Neighbors section, and I mean, it was great. You worked in a bureau office with about 10 or 12 other people, with 2 editors who were really talented and willing to teach you. And then you would spend time down at the main newsroom with all these incredible journalists that that like the Edna Buchanans and the Joan Fleshmans and all of these people that that I was competing against when I was with the News. I got a chance to work alongside them, which was it was a big difference. The Herald was at the time a really, really big operation.
Wow. So I discussed some events key events that happened between 1979 to the early 90s with Ramesh. I'd just like to pick out a few of them with you, even if you didn't kind of report on them. I guess you were around when it happened, so it'd be interesting to hear your take, either as in a professional capacity or as in a personal capacity. The McDuffie riots.
Yeah, that was, I mean, you couldn't be living in Miami and not be impacted by that. That was, I mean, I remember I was working actually at the airport, and I was a baggage loader. That's how I started in the industry. And I worked, a majority of my coworkers were black, and they were telling me the whole week, if these cops get off, there's going to be real trouble.
Really?
And sure enough, there was. And I remember basically they shut down the city because it was, it was dangerous. If you ended up in the wrong spot, you could easily end up dead, and a number of people did, which is tragic. But you could understand the anger. I mean, like I said, with the group of coworkers that I had, it was a big topic of discussion, and I understood where they were coming from. And also at the same time that was going on, we had the whole boat lift, which is the port of Mariel. Fidel Castro opened the port and said, anybody who wants to leave Cuba can leave, and so this huge exodus of people. But what a lot of people didn't know was that he also just emptied his jails and his insane asylums and sent all those problem people to Miami. And that ended up, that happened right around the time the riots happened in May. The boat lift started, I think, in April, was still going on. So all this is happening in this little town where I grew up. And it blew my mind. And one of the things I want to say real quick about Ramesh's book is Badge Tie Gun, like, in addition to being a great memoir of a cop, he also talks a lot about growing up in Miami, and he just completely nails it. I mean, the passages in the book where he talks about being a kid and the things that he did, or the things that I did, and the things that I enjoyed, and that's one of the reasons that I love the book so much, is because it reminds me of how awesome it was growing up there. But that was like a bucket of cold water on your head in 1980 when all that started happening.
And it went from being a tranquil, quiet place to being the murder capital of America, I think, for several years in the early 80s, wasn't it? So it sounded like it was a massive contrast.
Yeah, it was. It started with that happy time right at the end of '79 with that shootout at a place called Dadeland, which was a mall that was right down the street from where I lived, and a place that I used to go to all the time. And there was a shooting in a liquor store there, some cocaine cowboy stuff, and that sort of started it all. And then, then you had the McDuffie thing start breaking in '80, and then the boat lift happened. And you just were thinking, like, at least I was thinking, like, what more could happen, to us? Like, it was crazy. It was insane, really, really insane.
Of course, you were a young man then, so you probably weren't really, although you did a lot of travelling, I guess, you weren't really at one with the world, were you, at the time? Didn't sort of, as if now you would understand these events a bit more than perhaps when you were like not 18, 19 years old.
Yeah, it was just weird. It was a really weird experience. Of course, I wouldn't trade it for anything, but there was a lot, there was a lot of suffering going on, and even, as focused on yourself as you are when you're that age, you still couldn't help, because you drive. They had people living under the expressways. They had nowhere to put a lot of these people that came up from. They put them under the expressways. They're living under there, and you see them, and you're thinking, like, it was an eye-opening experience for someone who had grown up in what was a sleepy southern town.
I bet. Just for anyone who doesn't know, just quickly, the McDuffie riots. McDuffie was a motorcyclist who the police were chasing. So he either got off his motorbike or they caught up with him anyway. and then he sort of fought them tooth and nail, and they fought back, but they fought back with kind of a vengeance, killing him, and then they destroyed the evidence, so that it looked like the cops didn't do it. Then so the cops were held to account, but they were moved. The trial was moved from Miami to Tampa, where there was an all-white jury. And I guess, no surprise to anybody, the cops were, I think by and large, let off of the crime, therefore sparking the riots in Miami by African-American black people. Is
Yeah,
that right?
that's a pretty good accounting of it, and yeah, that's how the decade of the '80s started for all of us, and it would just go downhill from there. Actually,
Yeah. Well, yeah. The Mighty Vikings. Where were you about when that happened?
well, actually, it's funny because I think one of the questions that was on the list was the biggest story that I was ever involved in, and it wasn't I didn't cover the Mighty Viking case because I had left the news by that time, but the biggest story that I wrote before I left was in 1986, was a story about Jamaican gangs. And they had not been written about, but I had some sources in the Metro Police Department who said, this is like a big thing. They're doing these robberies. They're affiliated with the different political factions there, and there were the Shower Posse and the Spangler Posse, and just really they were running drugs, and they were just ruthless. Absolutely, like I think one of the things that sparked it was there was a shooting at a soccer field. One Jamaican gang wanted to get this guy, and he was playing soccer at a field with hundreds of people watching, and they just opened up, and they ended up killing a little girl, and I mean they killed him too, I think. But that sort of started it, and so I really, at the time, I was kind of a new reporter, and I didn't have the skills, but I had the information. So at the Miami News teamed me up with these two amazing reporters, Dan Christensen and Mike Ward, like amazing guys. Dan's still in South Florida and still making a mark down there. And I worked with them tirelessly on this thing, and we put it out there, and it was the first thing that had ever been written about Jamaican gangs and their influence in Miami, because they had the Colombians had kind of overshadowed them, and also a lot of the Cubans, especially some from Mariel. They were kind of like the big thing in the early 80s, but by 85, these Jamaican gangs have started to make inroads. They had cocaine, they had weed, and they were super violent. They just didn't like the Colombians. They at least the ones that I was dealing with, they just didn't care. They were just like, okay, you're in my way, I'll shoot you. So that was I was because that story ended up like Time magazine picked it up. It was on the nightly, not the local news, but the national news, because nobody had ever talked about it before. So that sort of like, that was my connection. That's why I connected with that story in Ram's book about the Mighty Viking, because it was sort of an offshoot of that. And if you read the, like, how crazy it was for him to try and his partners to try to deal with all of the machinations that were going on. Yeah, I ran into the same thing. Like when I tried to, talk to the government people down there and stuff, people would tell you one thing and do another. So I completely related to that story.
Yeah, we'll go on to the kind of relationship between the press and the police and the government in a bit. So I guess the Cocaine Cowboys, did you write on the Cocaine Cowboys? Were you about then, leading into like organised crime there?
They were actually, were kind of not tapering off, but like I said, by the time I got to be a cop reporter in '86, the Cocaine Cowboys had some competition, and they were no longer at the top of the heap. Certainly not like they were in the early part of the 80s. And I think the movie that Billy Corben and Alfred Spellman did captures it perfectly. I mean, I was aware, I knew people from the CENTAC unit, which CENTAC was a unit set up to do nothing but investigate drug-related homicides, because you had to trace all of these webs back, and it was just way, way, way too much, and there were too many of them for the regular detectives to be able to do it efficiently and without interruption. So they created this unit, and that's what the Cocaine Cowboys movie is sort of centered around, that unit, Al Singleton and those guys, and the hitman Rivi Ayala and all those guys. But they were kind of like, I think Rivi was already in jail by the time that I got into reporting. Like I said, they had competition, but it was well known, that most of the coke was coming from Colombia. They just found different ways to get it here, like through Jamaica, through Mexico, through Central America. Things had changed a little bit, and there wasn't so much of the concentration of Colombians coming to the U.S. There were many, many, many more people involved by the time that I started writing about it.
So who were the main players in the organised crime world when you were a reporter? So we obviously had the Colombians, the Jamaicans.
Colombians, Jamaicans. There was, like we talked about before, there really was no, it wasn't so much organized. It was organized in small groups. It certainly wasn't anything like the corporation that Lucky Luciano set up with the mob in the 40s, right, where everybody's working together and everybody was just trying to do their own thing, and people would cooperate and then they wouldn't, and then they would kill each other. There was no like Godfather. I guess you could say there were a lot of godfathers and godmothers too. Griselda Blanco comes to mind. There were just a lot of corruption, and the problem was, I think, that there was so much money coming in cash, so much money, that it was really impossible for anybody to stay on top of it from where I could sit. There was just so much happening and so much money, and that kind of money corrupts people, and it did.
Yeah, we'll go on to corruption in a sec, but was the Mafia anywhere to be seen in your reporting days?
Very, 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 very sparingly. I think that they were run out by the Colombians. I remember in the 70s, Meyer Lansky obviously lived there. There was, you had a lot of other people who were affiliated with the mob. I never really saw it until the Whitey Bulger case came. That had some obvious mafia undertones, but it was based in Boston. It wasn't, it didn't emanate from down in Miami. So I never really saw a lot of what you would call like standard mob influence. I mean, everybody knew about John Gotti, but I don't think that a Colombian with that's got to move some coke, I don't think he cared about John Gotti. I think that there was no real involvement, and there certainly wasn't that what would you call it, oversight, supervision of the business. So I did not see a lot of mafia influence.
By the sound of it, if the Mafia was to come in to Miami and try to muscle in, by the sound of it, they would have get kicked out pretty quickly by some big players there.
Yeah, it was a different world, and it was it was open territory, because I don't think that I think there had been a lot of efforts in the 70s to get the mob out. So I think one of the things, and now that I'm thinking about it, I think there was a vacuum there, And obviously, as a drug transshipment place, as a place to do business, Miami fit the bill for a lot of people. The Colombians saw it first, and they made the most of it. And then, success, breeds imitation, right? Everybody else wants to do the same thing. Everybody else wants to get rich. So you had that. But I think that because of the efforts, and I know after Meyer Lansky died, I think they were able to pretty much clean up a lot of the mob. And I'm sure there were still clubs and things like that run by the mob, but excuse me. They certainly didn't have the overarching influence that they had in a place like New York.
No, kind of small fry. So you mentioned about money corrupts, which of course it does, and the police. There was a issue a big issue in Miami during your reporting days of corrupt cops and I guess corrupt government officials. Were you involved in any of that?
I did cover some of it. I did actually know some people who got into some trouble. They were not bad people, but I didn't write about. I didn't do much on the River Cops case, which is, I guess, really the big one that comes to mind. The cops who were ripping off drug dealers and then selling their cocaine, but you could see. I think at one point during the 1980s there were close to 100 or more police officers who were under investigation for various and sundry corruption violations. It was a really, really tense time. Like, people didn't trust each other, and that whole thin blue line thing was starting to come apart just because it was so hard. There was so much money. There was so much money. It's impossible to imagine like how much money was flowing through Miami at that time. It built the city it is today. I hate to say it, but I think that's at least partially true.
You say that you knew one or two people and they were good guys. Well, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I want to be careful about it because I was sworn to confidence, and that's something that I take pretty seriously. But there was two individuals who were good cops who knew some of the River Cops there was a main gang of like 6 or 8 dudes. And then there was, a periphery of guys that were just helping them out. And mainly it involved not like taking money for anything, but they asked for loans for something. And this ended up coming out. And it really put these guys, because I don't know how much they knew, but I spent literally hours talking to these two guys on the phone, sometimes at like 4 o'clock in the morning. They would call me and just be so upset in their careers and their families, and it was a hard thing to watch. Why they reached out to me, I don't know, but it's something I've always kept in confidence. And looking back on it, it was the hysteria of the time. I think in any other time it would have been a slap on the wrist and don't do it again kind of thing. But because there was so much emphasis on it, it became a thing. And when things become a thing, especially when the media is involved, all bets are off. So yeah.
So when you say things become a thing, do you mean that this was widespread in the police department?
Well, it wasn't as widespread as it was, in my opinion, as it was painted up to be, because you still had cops every day who were doing their jobs. The problem was there was so much emphasis on it, and it looked, the optics were horrible. So when it becomes a thing, means it's on the radar, and that is like anything associated with it becomes tainted, and it becomes a bigger problem than in a lot of cases it needs to be. Now, there's some cases, like obviously they had huge problems with some of the, especially the Miami Police Department, with some of the officers that they hired. And they had to get rid of them because they were doing bad things. But for it to taint like a third of the entire force or whatever it was, I just thought it was a bit much, because I spent a lot of time with these guys. That was my job. I didn't do a lot of big story writing, because my job was covering the day-to-day stuff. So I was, at 2:00 in the morning, bringing coffee and donuts to the homicide scene for the guys that were out there working, and so I built up I built up a rapport and friendships and with a lot of these guys, and I saw what they did and how they did it, and I ended up really respecting it. There were some fantastic investigators and some fantastic people, and the two individuals that I know of were just unfairly tainted, and I felt bad, but it wasn't anything I could do about it. They just, I guess, needed a sympathetic ear, somebody outside to listen, to know they were being able to tell their story.
It's interesting they chose a journalist and not a counsellor.
I wondered the same thing myself, Rob.
Yeah, I bet. All this crime reporting you've done, and I guess you reporting on people who don't want to be reported on, can have its own dangers, right? Outing people, essentially. Did you ever receive death threats? Were you ever in fear for your life? Any of that sort of thing?
I did get a couple of death threats. Never paid much attention to them. Got subpoenaed a couple of times. The Herald had good lawyers, so I never had to go to court. And the only time I really feared for my life is I had followed, actually started writing about this guy that I think a robbery detective or somebody had told me about. His name was Alex Fuentes, and he was sort of like a robber. He was a killer. He was just a bad dude, but he was very smart, and he was very good at like dressing up in, like he impersonated doctors. He did all this kind of stuff. And they finally, I wrote several stories about him because he was a real problem. And plus, when they caught him, I think he escaped like twice. And so they brought him into court. They finally caught him. They brought him into court. And I was there to cover the arraignment or whatever it was. And I'll never forget, he stood up and turned around and looked at me and just stood there looking at me. And I'm like, oh shit, this guy is a bad dude. I could be in real trouble here. And my heart was, and I'm like, okay, he's in jail. I don't have to worry. Well, I guess it was maybe a week later, something, not long after that, he escaped again. And I thought, oh my God, Alex is out there. And maybe he's looking for me. He ended up getting killed in a shootout, I believe. Again, my memory's a little hazy on a lot of this stuff, but he ended up like confronting some cops, and I believe that he died in a shootout. And
that was a relief, wasn't it?
The relief was the only, because you're never, you don't want anybody to die in a horrible shootout. But you know what? When after that display in court, because the prosecutor was a friend of mine, and she told me afterwards, she goes, I've never seen anybody do that before. And I'm like, that scared the hell out of me. I mean, he stood up and he looked at me, and he had these like black eyes, and he was just, that was scary. That guy scared me. He scared me a lot. So
why did the prosecution want you there? What information did you have that could help convict this guy?
No, they wanted, I mean, the relationship is, I'm there because I'm serving a purpose for them. They wanted to bring publicity to this guy, because when a case had publicity and it went to court and there's TV cameras and everybody else there, judges are a lot less likely to, I mean, it's an advantage to them to do it. And I understood that. I mean, we're all, we were all using each other. I needed them to get my stories, and a lot of times when they wanted to get information out, or they wanted the public to know about something, I mean, there was no Twitter, we were the only avenue. So that's why somebody told me about Arlex, and I followed it up, and that's how I met the prosecutor. And she didn't want me. She didn't want me. I mean, I was in court because that was, what I did. But she later became a friend, and she said that she'd never seen anything like that before.
So just to be clear, you didn't take the stand. You were there as a reporter.
No, I was sitting in the gallery, like sitting there. I was in like the third or fourth row, and he was at the defense table, and he stood up and turned around, and he looked right at me. Like, basically, and he didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He was like, I know who you are. I know what you look like. I know who you are. I was not testifying. I was just there with my notepad and my pen, and yeah.
So he wasn't happy with some of the things you'd written about him previously?
Not at all.
Oh. What sort of things were you writing? I take it you were derogatory about him.
Well, I mean, it wasn't. I was just. He obviously felt that I was in cahoots with the cops, and that I was, trying to make sure that he spent the rest of his life in jail, which he obviously didn't want to do. Did you hear that?
Is that your thunderstorm?
Yeah, it's still going on. Anyway,
it's fireworks.
Yeah, it's nature's fireworks. But yeah, he knew that that people wanted to put him away, and it was and the fact that I put him out there in front of everybody, I think, made his life more difficult. Obviously, it would. If I wrote a story about you saying that you were impersonating a doctor so you could get in and rob people and stuff, I mean, I don't think you'd take too kindly to that, So it's I got where he was coming from, but it still scared me a great deal.
So there was nobody else reporting like you reported on him, I'm assuming?
On that particular case, not many people paid attention to it. I mean, what would happen is the way that it worked, at least in Miami, is usually the Herald would write something, and then everybody else would jump on it. A lot of times, though, we had very good TV reporters, and a lot of time they would break stories and we would follow them. But honestly, Rob, there was so much going on that it was just, you could never concentrate on any one thing, because the minute you got your head around something else would happen. So, I mean, we all followed each other, but we all worked together. I know that, I would go a lot of times to a press conference or something, and I would see TV reporters, and they would have my story, on their little notepads to ask questions about. I also went to a lot of press conferences where I had to ask questions about something a TV station had reported. That's just sort of the way that it worked in those days. I don't know how it works now.
So it was like friendly competition between other news outlets and reporters?
Yeah, friendly most of the time, not so friendly sometimes, but most of the time it was friendly, because we were all trying to do the same thing, and we were all out there running around in the heat, and
yeah,
yeah.
Just before we go on, because it is something that fascinates me, the relationship between the police and press. Well, it's a relationship between the press and anything. Certainly with sometimes what goes on over here, and I'm assuming goes on stateside as well. Was there any other time when you were sort of afraid? Not
well. Yeah, there was one time I went to a shooting, a police-involved shooting. An officer had shot somebody. This was in a little town called Opa-locka, which features very big in Ramesh's book, because that was where he became a police officer the first time. And a crowd started to gather, and I was there. with, pretty much by myself because it was the middle of the night. I used to work overnight, so it was the middle of the night. So I was the only reporter there, and this crowd starts to gather, and they're getting pissed because it was a white cop and obviously a black motorist who had been shot. And I don't know what triggered it, but all of a sudden, like a bottle landed at my feet. And there were maybe 5 cops there, and maybe about 50 people who had come from all these apartments. And this bottle landed at my feet and breaks, and I'm like, uh-oh. And I'll never forget a robbery detective whom I'm forever grateful for, who ended up becoming a homicide detective. He pulled out his gun, he grabbed me, and threw me into his car, and we got the hell out of there. Basically, everybody just left because they didn't have the horses, and they didn't want a confrontation where shooting would start. It was a smart move to do. I mean, they obviously had to go back later, but they went back with reinforcements and, let the situation calm down. But yes, and then when I covered the riots in 1989, the Super Bowl riots, I remember crouching behind a car with another cop as gunfire was, coming out of a building somewhere, and yeah, that was pretty scary. But generally, no. I always felt, for some reason, reporters feel like the notepad and the pen and the press badge gives them immunity from. I always felt that way. Like I was never afraid to walk. Like that night in Opelika, I was not afraid until somebody made an overt move. I was talking to people. I'm like, okay, who's this guy? What happened? What did you see? Doing my job. I was not afraid. I was never afraid to go into any part of Miami or any situation. And I don't know whether that was just naivete or what it was, but it worked out. I'm still here.
So why do you think that happened? Do you think it was because of the colour of your skin, or because they maybe thought you were a cop or part of an establishment, or they didn't like the press, or didn't like you?
I think all of the above. Although I never, that was the only time, other than the general melee of the '89 riots, that was the only time that anything like that ever happened. And I was in situations where, people would invite me into their homes. A lot of times, if I need to use a phone, to call the city desk or whatever, they would invite me into their homes, and everybody was very kind to me. So whatever that was, whatever power that notepad and the pen gave, it obviously worked because nothing really bad ever happened to me.
No. So that sounded quite hairy. The Super Bowl riots. What was that about? That's the sort of thing that would, dumbed down version of what would happen here with 2 rival soccer clubs, football fans going at it.
Well, it actually wasn't.
Pelting each other with stones, not guns, and things like that.
They call it the Super Bowl riots. It had nothing to do with the game. It just was, the Super Bowl was in Miami that year, and the Monday before the Super Bowl, like all the world's press comes for the game. It's a big deal, and you want to showcase the city. Well, there was a shooting. A motorcyclist. The police officer said the motorcyclist tried to run him over, and he shot the guy and killed the guy. And then the motorcycle wrecked, and I think the guy who was riding on the back of the motorcycle died as well in the accident. It was some similar circumstances to that. But this happened at maybe 3 or 4 o'clock on I think it was on a Monday. It was on a Monday. By 11 o'clock, that whole part of the city was pretty much in flames. People just went nuts. And the Miami mayor went out there and tried to calm things down. They chased him off. And I got a call. I was at home. I had just finished my shift, and I was at home, and they said, "Hey, we've got a really bad situation. Can you come to work?" And I'm like, "Sure." It was literally my second week at the Herald. Okay, I'd been there. I'd just been hired. This is January of '89. So of course I'm like, yeah, sure. And I drove in. I actually drove almost right over. Like I could look out my car and I saw the fires, and I'm like, okay, this is pretty bad. So I got there and they said, this is what we need you to do. And I literally worked for, me and everybody else on the staff worked for the next 4 days nonstop. Like you would go home and sleep for like 2 hours and then go right back to it, because it was just a continuing. And the entire world was watching, like, because all of these reporters from all over the world were there, and they're like, hey, we're here to cover the Super Bowl, but, people are shooting each other in the streets.
Far more exciting.
Oh, God. Like, he's like, well, what else could happen, So, anyway.
So I take it, obviously, that the motorcyclists were black and the cop was white, and then it started getting kind of similar to McDuffie riots. The black people were unhappy with the treatment of the two black dudes. So you were there when in like the crossfire, or the aftermath of it?
Yes. We went out. I went out with, what did they call them? They had a name for field forces. They would put like 4 cops in full armor into a car, and they would send them to different places to just try to basically, there was no way to stop it. I think, from what I recollect, the idea was just sort of to try to contain it and to make sure that innocent people didn't wander in and get hurt, and also to get any innocent people. Like, I mean, there were a lot of people there who weren't rioting, who just happened to live there, and they wanted protection as well. So the police had an obligation. But it was basically an all hands on deck situation. Like it was crazy. So I went out with them, and I would stay out with them until they were working 12-hour shifts. They would come back for a break, and then I would get off and call the desk and, talk to whoever was, what did they call him? The anchor writer for the story that we were working on. And I would, give him my stuff that I had, the quotes and the whatever, and then go home, sleep. One night I slept on the couch in the Miami police information office.
Really?
They let me sleep there for a couple hours because I was really tired, and I just didn't feel like driving home. So anyway, but yeah, that was a pretty crazy event as well. My first week at the Herald.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a baptism of fire, wasn't it? You knew you made it.
I felt like I did, and I was really grateful, because the level of reporting talent that was out there was pretty amazing. And because then, obviously the New York Times and the Washington Post sent in, I met some incredible reporters that were working at those papers, because they were all there to cover it, because it was the story at the time.
Of course, yeah. So the relationship between the press and the cops, is there like a blueprint for you guys of how to become friendly with or get information from police, or is it just an organic thing? How does that work? Nobody ever talked to me about that. I think it was something that was up to each individual, how they did their job on that level. I always felt that cops and reporters had a lot in common, and because we're nosy, we want to know what's going on, we want to be at the center of things. I didn't have that whole bring people to justice thing. That wasn't strong within me, like that force is strong with many reporters, and it's a great thing, but it wasn't with me. Mine was more just, talking about this world that they inhabited and that they lived in every day, and what was going on in this world and how it impacted everybody in the community. And I think for me, I never burned a source, because cops have long memories and they do not forget. If they tell you something and say, don't repeat it, you don't repeat it, because that's like they'll never speak to you again, and who can blame them? But what I discovered, Rob, is they like to talk about their jobs, and it was great because they spent a lot of time, after shifts in
don't ever go out drinking with cops, by the way.
Okay.
Sitting in bars, talking to each other about the work that they did and the challenges, but I think if they found somebody that they felt they could trust who was not in that world but knew of it and knew some of the players, and I think it's the reason that those guys from the River Cops case reached out to me. I think it was just, I was genuinely interested in what they had to say. And I genuinely wanted to know not just the information that would make me give me a great story. I wanted to know, like, how they were feeling about it and what they were going through. And I think people can sense that, especially cops. Especially, I dealt with a lot of, uniformed patrol officers from time to time, but my main exposure was to detectives, homicide, robbery, sexual battery, special investigations. These were smart, intuitive people, and there was not a fool among them that I ever met. And so I think that they could understand. I know, and I can't remember any specifics, but I know there were several times when I was tested. Like somebody would do something or say something just to see what I would do with it. Like they would tell me something and not, and just to see what I would do. And I know one time they took me to, these detectives took me to the morgue, and they took me to the room where they keep the people who they find who are decomposed. It's called the decomp room, and it was super refrigerated, but it was still pretty nasty. And they wanted to see what I would do. And then once we walked out, they're like, "Hey, let's go have breakfast." And I'm like, "Okay, let's go have breakfast." And I made sure that I ordered steak and eggs, and it was really tough. But I ate every bite of it because I didn't
steak and eggs because that's what they eat, is it?
Well, I just wanted to show that I wasn't fazed by it, even though it was like, wow, these, there's bags of jelly in here that used to be people. They just wanted to see how I would react. So they would test you, and I guess I passed all or most of the tests because they talked to me, and a lot of the conversations, and matter of fact, the majority of the conversations I had with many of them never ended up in print. But I always knew what was going on. When I was reporting toward the end of my time as a cop reporter, I only did it for another couple of years. But there was very little that happened that I didn't know about. And it was a great feeling to know that, that I had become someone at the Herald that they relied on to get information. And at that point I didn't care about bylines or anything like that. So a lot of times I would get information from the cops, on background, on sourcing, and then give it to the reporters who were writing stories, and they would use it. And so basically, I was like a buffer between that information getting out and the cops. Well, I never talked to those reporters, because they didn't. They talked to me. It was. That's kind of sort of how it ended up, and I was fine with that. I was not looking to. I was not looking to make a career as a cop reporter, and it, obviously it didn't work out that way. So, and that was a good thing.
Yeah. I'm interested, you say they took you to the morgue to test you. What was it, in case you sort of got all queasy, then you're not then they don't consider you a tough guy? What was the reason for that?
I don't know. I don't know what it was, and maybe it wasn't a test, maybe I'm just hallucinating that, but it seemed to me like they wanted to see how I would react. Because most reporters don't get to go behind the tape that they put up around crime scenes to see what's actually, because I worked overnights for the first part of my career when I was really starting out. I was a lot of times the only reporter there. So the cops would let me go. So I've seen people with their brains shot out, and I'd seen all that stuff. And it at the time it didn't bother me. Now I'm like I can't even look at a cut. But
That's
back in those days, that's it. Well, I mean, it's been a process. Back in those days, I didn't. That didn't bother me, and I think that this particular group, they were not detectives that I knew all that well. I had been out with them, and we were going. I had parked my car at their office, and we were going back, and they said, "Hey, let's stop by the morgue." They actually had to go there for a reason. They had to give something to the ME or something. So it was, I forget what it was. But anyway, they said, "Oh, hey, we're here. Let's go to the decomp room. Let me show you the decomp room." And I think they just wanted to see how I would react. That's how I felt at the time. So I steeled myself, and the smell was just like, even though they had all kinds of filters and stuff in there, it's just, decomposed people. You never forget that smell. Yeah.
So you said earlier on about you kind of take them a drink and a snack, late night cops, and that kind of helps build the relationship. I suppose it's doing something that you don't have to do to help them do their job when they're stuck somewhere without any food and drink. So is that the kind of thing which you would? I'm not saying there's anything underhanded about it, but it would be like, I'll help these guys out, and then maybe at some point in the future or tonight, whatever, then they can chat with me. We can get a mutually exclusive relationship type of thing.
Well, yeah, because I think, even as crazy as things were at the time, you still realize that kindness begets kindness. And I never really, that wasn't my motive. I wanted to help them, and I wanted to build a rapport, mainly because I was interested in what they were doing. And if I went out there with some Krispy Kremes and a bunch of coffees at 3:00 in the morning, they had to respond to these homicides no matter how, and there were many homicides, and I hate to say this, so many homicides in Miami-Dade at the time, that there were some that many that never were mentioned in the paper. They were just something that happened. I'll never forget, there was this one woman. She got shot. She got shot right through the chest, and they showed me the hole. Nobody. I called the desk and I said, "Hey, this is done in there. You want to?" No. Don't have room for it. So I wanted to be out there and spend time with them because I was curious as to what they were doing. I wanted to learn how they investigated homicides, how they, everything that they did. It was just fascinating to me. And honestly, almost to a person, they were so kind and so generous with their time. And again, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I think people like to talk about their jobs with someone who's genuinely interested, and in a situation that they know it's not going to come back to bite them in the ass, So I just was trying to create that sort of vibe that, hey, look, I'm interested, and and I'm out there driving around at 3:00 in the morning. What the hell else do I have to do?
And also, I suppose, but also, I suppose, if you're a cop and you stood on a crime scene 3:00 in the morning, you're probably bored out your nut, and then a friendly reporter comes along with a drink or whatever, and it's probably nice to talk to somebody, just to kill the time, shoot the breeze,
Yeah, I would stay out there, and a lot of times even when my shift was over, I would stay. And again, I wasn't doing it because I wanted to get these guys to be my sources, although I knew that would happen. I did it because I was really interested in what was going on. It was fascinating how they did their job and how hard it was. it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
So our friend Ramesh Nyberg, how did you come across this guy, and why? Out of, I think you're one of only two people in his preface. How come he's so fond of you? I know you'll say, "Well, ask him that," but I'm probably like, I couldn't. But yeah, I'm just interested.
Well, Ram and I have stayed in touch over the years because of his interest in writing, and because he is a very good writer, and he's been writing. It's something that he's always done. But we met on a case. He was looking to get the identity of a guy they had found in the Everglades at the scene of a smuggler's plane that had crashed, and the guy's head had been cut off by this plane had wrecked, and this guy, obviously his head was gone, so there was no head. So all they had was his body, and they didn't know who he was. He had no ID. So he was looking for, he wanted something to get in the newspaper, because again, there was no other way to get the information out there about who this, the description that they had, the guy had a particular belt buckle that was pretty unusual. It was a Pratt & Whitney, which is the name of an engine maker, jet engine maker, belt buckle, and I think it was Pratt & Whitney. Anyway, so Ram wanted that out, and he called me, and I had met him once or twice before, and he seemed like a really cool guy. But he called me, and we ended up talking for like an hour, and I got the thing in the paper. Didn't help. I mean, he ended up finding out who the guy was. Turned out it was a guy he went to high school with, guy he knew. Check out the book if you want to see that whole story. But we ended up becoming friends, and because I was friendly with a lot of his colleagues, I ran across him, and then when he transferred to the cold case squad, we kind of lost touch, because that's about the time that I was leaving the whole cop reporting thing. But as I said, he was writing, and later I became an editor at the Herald, and Ram became a columnist in the section that I edited. He wrote like a column every month or something. I forget what it was called, but he would write about life as a police officer, and it was just it was a really good thing to have, and it got a great response. So we bonded over that as well, and we just stayed friends ever since. And then when I got into the television thing, he was very, very helpful in helping me track down people, and I think we even had him on camera in a couple of the episodes and stuff, because he's really good on camera, as I'm sure you've already seen. So yeah, that's kind of how that thing evolved with Ram. We've stayed friends over the years.
Yeah, he's a nice guy. Just before we get on to like when you left the Herald, just a few questions. You've mentioned your biggest story. What was your most memorable story? Like if someone had come up to you and said, "Tell me a story, John. Tell me a story quickly."
Okay.
What's the one that pops into your head, do you think?
There's only one, and it's a reason that I stopped. The reason that I stopped becoming a cop reporter. It's a little long, but I guess we got a few minutes, right?
Go for it. Yeah, please.
You're a captive audience, so I'll tell you.
Thank you.
I was coming home from playing tennis on a Sunday afternoon in late 1989. I had been playing tennis with a reporter friend of mine, a guy by the name of Ian Katz, and he had kicked my ass, as he always did. But anyway, I enjoyed being out there, and I always learned something when I played with him. Anyway, I'm driving home along the airport expressway, and I look over, and there is a unmarked police car next to me. They had these particular cars that they drove in those days. They were called K cars, made by Dodge. Biggest pieces of junk you ever saw. But anyway, the county bought like 6 zillion of them, because I think they paid like $5 each. But anyway, I see this K car, and I see a detective that I know driving the car. There is a guy sitting in the front seat who I don't recognize, and then a detective that I know sitting in the back. And he sees me, and he starts waving. And so I'm riding along, we're going down the expressway, and I'm like, "Hey, how you doing?" So he gets a notepad, and he writes, I'll never forget this. He writes, "This is murderer." And he puts an arrow, and he holds it up So the arrow is pointing at the guy in the front seat. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? And he goes, and then he puts a pad down and he goes, follow us. So, all right, I'm not doing anything, right? It's Sunday afternoon. I was just going home to get dinner. So I follow them, and they go, take the expressway. They go all the way out west to a place called Chrome Avenue, which is really where in Miami-Dade County they consider the Everglades starts and goes west from there. They roll up. There's the coroner's wagon. There's a state attorney. There's a police diver. And a couple other homicide detectives, all waiting at this intersection. They roll in, and they get out of the car, and they tell me, oh, this guy just copped to this murder, and he killed his best friend, or a friend of his, and he's going to take us to the body. Do you want to come? And I'm like, yeah, sure, okay, I'm in. Why not? I'm dressed in my tennis, Back in those days, you wore tennis whites, I mean, I wanted to be fashionable. I think I had on a Nike shirt, just like I do right now, and some tennis shorts, and anyway, my sneakers. So I get in their car, and they drive out, and this guy is going to take them to where he dumped this guy's body. It's out in the Everglades. So we get down all these roads, and by now it's like getting dark, okay, because it was late in the day. I mean, it was like 5 or 6 in the afternoon. It's starting to get dark. So all this caravan, we turned down this dirt road, and we're out in the middle of East Jabip somewhere, wherever we were, and the guy is telling them where he's put this body. So we go out there and we stop, and what he's done is he's weighted this poor bastard down with chains and thrown him into a canal that runs along the Everglades. So he tells us, yeah, I think it was right here, and he pointed out that he was handcuffed, so he's pointing out stuff, and the diver gets in the water and goes down. Meanwhile, I'm just sort of standing there. I'm just like watching this because this is fascinating, right? What a way to end your weekend. And so the diver comes back up and he says, this guy's weighted down with chains. I can push him up, but I can't get him out of the water. So all the cops looked at me. I'll never forget, they all looked at me because I'm there in a pair of shorts, and they're there in their, in their slacks and their good shoes and whatever, and their badge ties and guns. And I'm like, okay, fine. So I go down to the edge of the water. The diver goes down, pushes the guy up. I grab the chains, and I'll never forget. I mean, the guy's looking right up at me, and his eyes had been eaten by fish or something by that time. I mean, he was a mess, and he had been stabbed like, I don't know, 40 or 50 times. What had happened was the guy made a move on this other guy's girlfriend, and they were smoking crack, and the guy lost it and just stabbed him. So I reached down, and I pull the guy. And he actually, as I pulled up, the guy came out of the water because the diver was pushing. He had no leverage down there. He was pushing, and I fell down, and the guy basically landed like almost in my lap. Okay, I'm telling you, this didn't even faze me. I was laughing. Okay, I'm laughing like, okay, I got a dead guy in my lap. So I pull the guy up, and I pull him on the shore, and he's there. And he's dead as can be. Smelled really bad. And then I go in, and while they're processing the body, like the ME's looking, and they have to do all this stuff with the body, I start talking to this guy, and he starts telling me his story. Oh, yeah, we were smoking crack, and he tried to make it with my girl, and I couldn't, and then I put him in the bathtub, and I tried to put acid on him, but it didn't, he's telling me all this stuff, like basically his whole confession, which he had already given to the cops. And I'm like, okay, so I mean, basically I pull this body out of the Everglades. I listened to this guy tell me this horrific story about how he killed this guy. And then I'm like, all right, can I get a ride back to my car? They took me back. I think the state attorney drove me back because she was like, she just needed to be there for whatever. I think she drove me back. And, I've got like like, what? My shorts are wet. I go home. I call the city desk. I'm like, hey, do you want a brief on this? They're like, nah, we don't care about that. It's a crack homicide. We don't care. Okay. Cook my dinner, eat my dinner. And that was when I realized, like that night, I'll never forget, that I'm like, I should be bothered by this. This should bother me. I just pulled another human being out of a canal, and it should bother me, and it didn't. And I said, at that point, that's when I made up my mind that I was going to stop being a cop reporter. And so I did, about 6 months later.
So, did you think that your empathy was lacking in your life and you were worried about that? Or where was your head at?
Rob, it was just this feeling that I should have been bothered by it and that I completely was unfazed. Like, could I do something like that now? There's no way. I mean, I wouldn't even get near a homicide scene. I see cops, I go the other way. But I'm like, I'm way too into this. It's way too easy. And it was also, it's kind of disrespectful. I mean, I pulled this guy out and I fall down and he plops down like almost on my lap and I'm laughing my ass off. I mean, that's not normal to me. So I said, I probably need to do something. I'm a little too close to this. And it turns out I made the right decision. But that was the moment. That was my most memorable story, was the story that I never wrote.
Oh, the story that you never wrote. Wow.
Yeah, because I never wrote about that. I've only ever told. You're only like the fourth or fifth person I've ever told that story to.
Really, that's a fascinating story. Fascinating part. I wasn't expecting that, to be honest. I want to go on to this Everglades, because every time I think of the Everglades, I think of crocodiles. What happens? I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, but it popped into my head when you were talking. If that happened, like what that crack dude did to his mate with chains, and I'm being like, I might be really naive with this question, because obviously I'm not involved in the Everglades in Miami, whatever. I live in a place where we don't have crocodiles apart from in zoos. What happens if they chucked this dude chucked him into like a crocodile infested swamp? I take it a diver's not just going to go, I'll jump down and see.
Well, first of all, and I don't mean to be an idiot about this, but I am Floridian. So mostly in the Everglades, you have alligators. Crocodiles.
Okay. Yeah.
They're located. They're in different places in Florida, but you have alligators, and the police divers there were very cognizant of that. As a matter of fact, one of the officers that was there had his gun out in case they saw an alligator, because they didn't want it to get to the diver who was down there trying to do his work. But I mean, that's a place where who knows how many people have disappeared in the Everglades, because it's if you've never seen it, it's absolutely beautiful, but it can be very remote, and it's huge. And there's nothing else like it in the world. It's not a swamp. People think it's a swamp, but it's actually a river that flows from Central Florida down to Florida Bay. So you put somebody out there and you're never going to see them again. I mean, it actually took this crack killer about an hour to find where, because he couldn't remember where it was, because it all looks the same. So yeah, and I know that when the Value Jet plane crashed in the Everglades in 1996, and the divers were out there doing recovery, they always had someone on the boat with a rifle in case. But most alligators are like, there's too many people. I'm gonna leave.
Really.
But had that body stayed out there much longer, it would have been devoured. Although I don't think the chains would have been very appetizing.
Probably not. I think that's the worst job in the world now. A police deep sea diver in the Everglades.
They have it rough.
Because in the middle of the night, when it's dark, and the police, I guess, are just using a spotlight or something to try to spot these crocs, they could easily miss them.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, I said earlier that I'll tell you my story about my phobia of alligators, crocodiles. When I was a kid, I went to Miami, and I was reading a newspaper. And what's really interesting in Miami, and I don't know whether they have this. They don't have this in the UK. I don't know whether they still have it in Miami. Is you could like put a quarter in a little newspaper machine, which was along every street corner, and then pull out a newspaper.
Yeah.
Which we never had that in the UK. So I found that really like cool. So anyway, got the newspaper out, put my quarter in, and I was reading it. You might probably be on. It was I think 1990 or 1995. I went there twice, one of the two. So you were probably around then. I wrote the article. and I was going through this paper, and I saw an article about a man who had terrible sleepwalking problems, and he went to sleep one night and then woke up in the middle of a crocodile alligator infested swamp. And it stayed with me, that image of, just imagine it, you go to bed, chilling out, you fall asleep, and then you wake up and you're like, where the hell am I? It's like, oh my god. I mean, the guy survived, but that must be like, oh, that's like a nightmarish scenario for me, I guess, and anybody else.
It is a nightmare scenario. The Everglades are very beautiful, but they can be very, 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 very deadly. Very deadly.
And also, we drove. We did what was called a fly drive back then. So we flew into, I guess it must have been Miami, and then we went down to Orlando. And when we were driving the car, these alligators or crocodiles were at the side of the road sunbathing.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
yeah.
that's not a world I'm used to. It's like, you know, I like to see pretty girls in bikinis sunbathing. I don't want to see crocodiles or alligators. That's not my cup of tea.
Yeah, I hear you. But that's, you know, when you grow up there, it's part of the landscape. I mean, I'm a huge animal lover, and I love all animals, no matter what they look like, including crocodiles and alligators. But you know, when you're out there, you do have to be cognizant of it. And I know the times that I have been out there with cops, especially with the divers, they're very, very careful about that, because, you know, a big alligator can easily take you down. And they have a method of like rolling you over to disorient you, and they're very efficient at what they do. So, yeah, it's a worthwhile phobia, Rob. That's all I can tell you.
It's worthwhile phobias to have, isn't there?
You got to be scared of something. You might as well be scared of that.
Scared of something that is nowhere near where I live and is worth being scared of. Like some people have got phobias against tomato ketchup. That's like a terrible phobia to have, isn't it? Yeah. Oh man, I don't know. Crocodiles. It's already spinning me out a bit. There was something else I was going to mention about crocodiles, but I can't remember. The weirdest story that you've ever come across. You've all worked on.
Boy, that was pretty much every day.
Yeah.
You know, what I was known for at the Herald, or at least what my reporter friends would tell me I was known for, was they called them "Hey Martha" stories, because I was always the one who wrote the stories. That the guy would at the breakfast table would say, "Hey Martha, did you see this? Can you believe this?" That was so that was my thing, was weird stories. It's really hard to pick one. If I had to, there was one in 1986. A guy was running for the Florida House of Representatives. He was a political guy, and he went missing. And then he turned up a few days later saying that he had been kidnapped and forced to get on a Greyhound bus and go from Miami to Weehawken, New Jersey, as part of some political conspiracy against him, which was like the nuttiest thing people were just like, you got kidnapped and put on, and you wrote on, and like, really? The worst part about it was that he ended up, I forget how, not much long after all that, because it was a huge story, because everybody couldn't believe it. I mean, even Carl Hiaasen wrote a column about it, who's one of the great crime reporters of all time, was a colleague of mine at the Herald. And he ended up killing himself on the side of the expressway not long after that, because I guess he just couldn't take the ridicule or whatever. But that was just such an odd thing. But really, Rob, every day my job was to find the weirdest, craziest, funniest, stupidest. I mean, it was things like I walked into a police station one day and there was a girl sitting there, she was about 15 or 16, and she was in handcuffs. And I'm like, what is the deal with her? And the detective goes, look at that poster there. And there was a poster from United Way, Give to the United Way. And she was on that poster as a success story. And they had just arrested her for breaking into somebody's house and, getting into a fight and something. So it was stuff like that was the kind of stuff that I specialized in writing about. I didn't do the big long investigations or anything like that. I mostly wrote the Hey Martha stories. So they were all weird. That was my job.
Sounds an amazing job. I remembered what I was talking about with the crocodiles just quickly. It might save someone's life, this. So listen carefully. And you probably know it anyway. Or maybe you think it's a myth. I was told, I knew a golfer who would golf a lot in Florida. And he said that if a crocodile alligator goes onto a golf course, the green, it can run at you, and it can run really fast in a straight line. But he said, if you're ever in a situation where a crocodile's running at you, just run in a semicircle, because apparently it can't turn very quickly. Myth or true?
I don't know. I have heard that growing up all my life. I have never had to run from an alligator or crocodile, so I don't know. They don't seem to be very agile on land. I know they can move, like if you've ever seen an iguana. It's sort of the same. They can really motor, but I don't think they're Ferrari turn on the dime kind of thing. So I think if I think that might actually work, although I don't know if it's a myth, and I should have to ask my friend that works with wildlife about that one of these days. I will ask and let you know.
Okay, thank you. I bet you didn't think that when we were going to do this chat that we would be talking so much about crocodiles. So moving swiftly on, who would you say the best crime reporter out there is? Tough question, I know, but who would you say?
Can I give you a top 5? You mean from the time that I was working?
Including the time you're working.
Including the time that I was working, I would say, well, Edna Buchanan, obviously. And she worked a lot with a woman named Joan Fleshman, who I would say they were two of the best. They could get anybody to say anything to them. And they found a way to get details that I was always in awe of everything they did. And I later ended up becoming friends with Joan. She still lives in Miami. And she was just an incredible, incredible person. Sydney Friedberg, another woman who, I don't know how she did it. She was a little tiny woman, but this huge force of personality, and she broke so many stories. She won so many Pulitzers. It was just being in the same newsroom as them. Carl Hiaasen, whom I just mentioned, who was a columnist by the time that I got there, outstanding crime reporter, brilliant columnist. If you ever want to read some great books that'll tell you everything you need to know about Miami, just pick up a Carl Hiaasen novel. He's written quite a few of them. Jeff Lean, who I believe is now at the Washington Post, or I don't know, who was the guy that ended up writing a book with Guy Gugliotta, another excellent reporter, called Kings of Cocaine. He basically broke down the whole cocaine operation. Brilliant man, and an excellent tennis player, I might add. But yeah, I was just, I could take this list on for another half an hour, but that's the newsroom that I was in, and those are the people that I was around and influenced by. And as a reporter coming up, you couldn't ask for people who were more driven, determined, talented, ethical. They weren't underhanded, awful people, and I'm going to say I've met some reporters who are, but that particular group, and the list could go on, was never like that. They worked hard, and they believed in what they were doing, and I have nothing but respect and admiration and gratitude, because they were very, very nice to me, all of them.
Yeah, how put you in good stead for your writing and for when you left the Herald as well, I guess.
Yes, they did.
Proudest moment on the Herald or the Miami News?
Well, my proudest contributions as a journalist really came after I became a cop reporter. If for cop reporting, I would think that that doing the story on the Jamaican gangs was a pretty proud moment, because that was early on in my career, and it was the first time I'd ever had a really big. I mean, it was like a 2 or 3 part series, and I had never done anything like that, and I was really proud of that and the reaction that it got, and the fact that it brought something to light that up until that point really, hadn't been in focus. So I would have to. I think that stands right up there. But what I did afterwards as an editor and as a mentor, and I became a teacher and stuff like that, that is what I mean, to me, that was the biggest contribution that I made. But that was a lot later on.
So yeah, you touch on that there. So and you also, I was going to ask you, like, why did you leave the Herald? Well, you've covered that. So what did you do after the Herald?
Well, I went to a newspaper, and I went to work for the St. Petersburg Times, which is now called the Tampa Bay Times. I worked there, and then I was an editor there. I was not a reporter, and then I had an opportunity to get involved in doing some television shows. So I gave all that up and moved out to Hollywood, and I stayed out there for 4 years. We made some shows. I came back, worked for another newspaper, worked for 2 other newspapers, the South Florida Sun Sentinel and the Naples Daily News, and then I went back to California and did worked on another group of shows, and then I moved back here to where I am now, and this is where I must stay. I'm done moving.
Yeah. I've heard that Hollywood, like, there's a nice part of Hollywood, and I watched a documentary on it. It's a bit of a shithole, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it depends on. Well, L.A. is a huge city. I mean, I lived and worked in. Our studio was in Burbank. Hollywood was over the hill, and there were great parts of Hollywood, but there were some parts of Hollywood that you just didn't want to go to. Hollywood itself is kind of where all the tourists go. It's where all the attractions are. It's the areas around there that where people actually live, and they're not that bad. But LA's it's a huge, massive city, and it's got huge, massive city problems like traffic.
Yeah, and gangs and things like that. Yeah. So you've been involved in writing. Kind of crime, organised crime, haven't you? And one of the things that you were a writer for was the Valentine's Day Massacre.
Yes.
Can you explain a bit about
that? The Mob's Bloody Valentine, as it was titled in the UK. We did that for Nat Geo. We had a friend that we worked with in the production company who was like a mob freak. I mean, he knew everything. That's how I met Henry Hill from Goodfellas, the Goodfellas guy, and he's the one who sort of.
Stop right there. You met Henry Hill from the.
Yeah. We did a shoot with him. It was absolutely hysterical. It was him and his brother, whose name was Joe. And it was a promo for something, and And yeah, we spent the entire day in this Italian restaurant with Henry and Joe Hill, and it was hysterical. I mean, the guy was he's a complete nut. And he was like, he's like, yeah, people want to kill me. I don't care.
He's drunk, wasn't he?
He was so funny. I mean, he made a big impression. He did like a bunch of Howard Stern shows. I hadn't really paid much attention. I had seen the movie, but when I met him, I understood. I mean, the guy was the guy who hosted our show, the show that we did for Nat Geo, about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, was another guy that our friend introduced us to named Johnny Fratto, whose family was pretty well connected in LA. And like when you went into a restaurant with Johnny, you got like the best seats. I mean, it was like, that was the only time that I've ever really been exposed to genuine mob guys. And I certainly, I mean, what I knew about Johnny was that he was a guy who had connections. I don't know anything more about him than that. He hosted our show. He did a very good job for a guy who wasn't a TV personality, and he treated us like gold. He had this apartment in Beverly Hills where, it was interesting. Those guys. So I did get some exposure to that. And the show that we did was just about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and it was based on a book by a guy named Jonathan Eig, who's an outstanding writer, that sort of postulates that maybe Capone didn't have as much to do with that whole thing as people thought. So that was the premise of the show. But there was still the show was visually fantastic. And it turned out pretty well. It did pretty well in the UK from what I understand. I don't remember what the numbers were. This was back in 2011 something. But it did really well in the UK. Just so
Henry Hill, just so I know, I'll look it up. So is Henry Hill involved in this?
He's not in that show. This was a promo for another show that we did. I'm sorry, I worked on so many different things that they all kind of run together, but I remember the shoot vividly because I produced it, and I remember Henry got there like 8 o'clock in the morning. I don't think he'd been to bed, and the first thing we had to do, I had to send a PA to first back to his house to get his dentures because he forgot his dentures, and then to a store to get some denture cream because he didn't have any denture cream. So that was my first. I'm like, you don't have any teeth, dude. Oh, I forgot my dentures. Yeah. He was.
Was he a drunk?
Huh?
Was he a drunk when you knew him?
I don't know. I got the impression he had been up all night, but I didn't get the impression that he was hammered. He just seemed like a guy who really didn't care about anything. I mean, he just at this point, and this was, oh God, when was this? 2011. I mean, he didn't live too much longer. No. He didn't get killed. I think he died of natural causes, but he was really at the end of the rope, and he just didn't care. And he was like, we paid him. That's all he cared about, and he did everything that we asked him to do, and he did it well. I must say. Really?
Well,
yes.
The thing is with him is he never got over ratting on his friends, and I think it crucified him inside.
I can't even imagine, and that's why you never judge people. I mean, when I looked at the guy and I thought, man, how would it feel to do that? It's just it's inconceivable to me. But he's that's his reality, and maybe that's why he acted the way he acted.
Yeah. Did you enjoy being around him? Do you enjoy his company?
That day, yes. I think it would have been a bit much if we'd gone out after the shoot. I don't think I would have gone along. But that day he was very nice, and he worked really well with our director, and whenever we needed him to do something, he did it. And he was pleasant as far as that goes. He never, got into tirades, or I've seen that on sets before. And, that never happened with him. I don't know if his brother seemed to I don't know what his brother's connection was, but his brother seemed to be a pretty down-to-earth guy, and whenever Henry would go off the chain a little bit, Joe would sort of reel him back in. So we had that as well. But I was totally fine being around the guy. I didn't have any problems with it. I just can't imagine the kind of burden that someone like him is carrying around.
Yeah. You you were also a writer on AMC Mob Week.
Yeah, that was mainly I wrote prompts for who was on there? Was it Rudy Giuliani? One of those guys. Some guy, a guy from New York. No, maybe it was. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
No, that's cool. That's cool.
I wrote the prompts because Mob Week was a thing that AMC did where they showed mob movies and they would have these well-known characters. Like I know Rudy Giuliani did it one year, and they would introduce the movies and say, "Oh, my favorite scene in The Godfather was this because of this, and my favorite scene in Goodfellas was this." So I mainly there was only prompts like this is what you need to cover, and then they would just sort of ad lib it. But I had to write the prompts because there were certain things that had to be in there that were necessary for them to work. So that was my role on that show. It was a lot of fun. I mean, we spent a week in New York, and when we did it again for they had another one called Fright Week or Fright Month or something. And I did the same thing for a couple other people, and they were all just really, really like gracious about everything. And the ad libs they came up with were sometimes like so good, I could have never have written anything like that.
Really, it's an interesting topical Giuliani, isn't it? He's just been debarred.
Yeah, yeah. This was back in the day. This was like 2010, 2011. He was still basking in the whole 911 glow, and I'm not a political person, so I mean he was fine, and like I said, he came up with some ad libs, and he was like a huge fan of these mob movies, which was really funny, given that at the time he was, he'd made his name prosecuting a lot of these.
Yeah,
he loved these movies, and he would talk about them, and he would get all animated, and it was an interesting experience.
Did you meet him?
Yeah, I was there at the shoot. Yeah.
Oh, really? What was he like as a person then?
I mean, again, when you're on a shoot, my role was just to make sure that he understood the prompts. It was very limited. I didn't direct him. I didn't produce those shoots. We hired an outside company to do it. I was just there to fulfill my role. But he seemed very nice, very tolerant. Of course, you've got to do like 6 zillion takes of everything, and it takes patience to do it. But he dedicated the time to it because, as I said, he seemed to have a real affinity for these movies, and mainly what I got for New York. Like the main thing he loved about all those movies is they were New York centric movies, And so I got that from him, but I didn't have any really long, other than work-related conversations with him or anything like that.
Slightly different character to Henry Hill.
Yes.
And you were the executive producer. I don't even know what that means. What's an executive producer?
Basically, that means you get money for doing nothing. No.
Cool. Right, that's my new job.
In our shop, executive producer was the title that we used for the people that actually were behind the shows that we did. But of course, all of us had like 10 other roles that we did as well. So the executive producer was sort of, in a lot of cases, it is just that. It is just, in many projects, it's just attaching a name to it, a name that people know, executive producer, and they see a name that they know, and that's a big thing out there. Is you got to have a track record, and you got to have some capital built up. So yeah, yes, I was executive producer on a number of shows,
including Real Miami Vice.
Real Vice Miami, yes, that was the show that we shot down here. We did 3 episodes. We did the River Cops. We did the Scott Rakow killing, which I didn't talk about. There's so many stories, Rob. And then we did the FBI shootout with Maddox and Platt. Those are the 3 that we did. And
because the Platt and Maddox one was that was also in Ramish's book, and I did bring it up with Ramesh, but I didn't want to bombard you with too many stories. So.
I don't want to bombard you with too many stories.
No, it's cool. Please do. Were you a reporter in the Platt and Maddox?
Yeah, I covered it. Well, actually, I was still working nights, so that story was so big that it was covered by our day shift pros, and they were pros. But I had written about 2 of the homicides, a homicide and a shooting that they had done earlier that were still unsolved. I had written about those.
So wives, girlfriends, or something.
No,
they were rumored to.
They when they went to get cars, they would go out to this place where people would shoot in the Everglades, and they killed this guy, and they took his car, and they used the car to do, and then they went back and they shot another guy, thought they killed him, but they didn't kill him. He ended up like crawling, like ridiculous story, crawled like a mile or something, all bloody and shot, and but they were never able to catch them until that day in 1986, which was a bad day. I did go to the scene, and because that was a kind of all hands on deck thing. But as the story began to evolve, it became more of something that was happening during the day, and that was handled by the reporters that we had that were just plugged in and knew what they were doing. And so I contributed to it, but it wasn't something. I mean, I was fascinated that these were the guys that I had written about, unknowingly. I didn't know it was them, but they were the ones that committed those crimes.
Yeah, for people that don't know, Platt and Maddox were 2 horrible human beings who committed the crimes which you just said. It's rumoured that they murdered their girlfriends, and also they slaughtered 2 FBI agents who tried to apprehend them. It was quite a historic case, really, wasn't it? Because they had such superior firepower to the cops, and it changed a lot of minds in the powers that be to arm the police better, so that something like this, they could handle this type of thing more appropriately, rather than, I think from memory, Platt and Maddox had semi-automatics and the cops just had pistols or something like that. So they were lambs to the slaughter, really, weren't they?
Yep. They had one of them, either Maddox or Platt had, I forget which one, had a Ruger Mini 14 that just, and the cops had their 30, and the FBI guys had their 38. I mean, that's not even a contest.
Yeah.
So
crazy. Yeah, that'll be an interesting story. Did you realise at the time when you sort of covered it, or you were covering elements of it, that it would be such a historic kind of event?
Well, I mean, the day that it happened, yeah, because it was, and I think to this day it's still the bloodiest day the FBI has ever had, because in addition to the 2 agents that were killed, like there were 6 that were wounded, badly wounded, including Edmundo Morales, or I think that's how you say his name, the guy who ended up killing them. He had been basically had his arm almost shot off, and he was racking his shotgun with one hand, and he walked over to the car and put an end to those 2 guys. But he was wounded. That was just, that was an obvious Miami in the 80s, dude. That was just
slightly different than the 70s.
Yeah, slightly different, but it got us to where we are today. How's your espresso doing? Excuse me.
Good. It's good. It's kicking in. And it's well and truly kicked in. We'll still be here for another 8 hours. I don't usually drink coffee. It's usually tea, which is quite appropriate for Independence Day, isn't it? So you won an award. You probably won many, but what was your award for?
Well, I think we talked about the Emmy, and that was for the Future Cat show. That's
We've talked about it off camera a little bit, but I don't think we talked about it when we were fresh.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was. Yes, I worked with the production company I was affiliated with. I wrote this show called Future Cats for National Geographic, and it was a show about evolution and how big cats would evolve in different worlds. And it was because it was a kind of a fantasy thing. Although we used real experts and we had all these awesome, like evolutionary biologists and paleontologists and archaeologists on camera, the show was a fantasy, so we had to create a fantasy world. And I was lucky enough to work with this graphics team that was just like second to none. It was like eight or 10 people, and they were just the best. And the graphics were so good, we won an Emmy for the graphics. And so it was a team thing. Obviously, they couldn't have designed the graphics without the words that we came up with, and the show wouldn't have done. It had to be shot, directed, all that. So we all shared in it, but that was a pretty huge thing. It was only like 8 or 9 years ago, I think, something like that. I was pretty happy about that. I was pretty happy. I was happy for them too, because the stuff they came up with. I mean, if I'll try to find the show. I don't even know if I have a copy of it and send it to you, because graphically, it's just baller. It looks amazing. So yeah,
cool.
It was a well-deserved award, I must say, for that.
Did was it just a nice keepsake, or did it actually help elevate your career?
It didn't do anything for me. I didn't. I never tried to leverage it. I mean, I mentioned it. But at that time, I mean, I was getting toward the end, and I don't know how. I think it helped some of the other people, because when you're a graphic designer who's won an Emmy for your graphic design, you do get people pay attention to you. I'm sure that it helped other people, but I never tried to leverage it for anything, because I really wasn't looking for to continue my TV career or whatever you want to call it. I had pretty much decided that I wanted to come back and just do what I'm doing now, which is being a freelance writer and editor, and working from home. And I've been doing that since like 2017. So I did it before it was cool. And I didn't. I mean, I think it's on my LinkedIn or one of them, and I put my IMDb credits out there because I'm proud of that. I mean, I worked in television, and it's not an easy business to get into, and I feel like I was very lucky. So,
no, definitely.
But yeah, that's the story of that. And as I said, it really. I mean, it was just. I have a picture of it. I have a picture of me holding it. It's a very big statue. I was surprised. It's very heavy, and that's fine. It's all I need. That's all I need.
Cool. Before we close off, if there was a budding writer out there, or somebody who was interested in writing journalism, what advice would you have for them?
Find something else to do. No.
That's that.
I don't. I mean, part of my job after I stopped being a reporter and became an editor, I worked and taught young reporters. That's what I did, and that's where I think I made the biggest contribution. I wouldn't know what to tell them these days, because the landscape is so much different. It's really hard to stand out, and basically with X and Facebook and TikTok, everybody's a reporter, and the governments and the police don't need reporters anymore, because they can speak directly to the public. They can put out their spin or their spiel on X or whatever, and they don't need that conduit, which is what we used to be. So I really wouldn't know. I mean, writing is, you just got to practice it. You got to write like you talk. You got to be, relaxed. Don't use a lot of big words. I mean, those are just basic things. But as far as career goes, I wouldn't know what to tell somebody coming up today. I really wouldn't. I hate to say it, but the
Sound like it.
landscape is so much different, Rob. It's just so
Yeah,
much different.
challenging. Yeah, but the creative process is still the same, though, right?
It is, but the goals, the standards are different. I mean, I did work in 2016 and 2015 at a newspaper. I was an editor, and our goals were totally different. It was get it fast, get it posted on, and at the time it was Twitter, get it posted on Twitter, and then, retweet stuff that you need. And it was a totally different vibe than going out and reporting and coming back and writing a story that would appear in the next day's paper. No, you were doing something. Your deadline was like right now. And that's totally different, but that's the reality today. And I think if I tell anybody anything, it would be learn to write fast because,
Not right fast, yeah.
you got to write fast these days.
Have you ever like considered or even written? I didn't. In my research, it didn't come across that you had like fiction or novels, or anything like that.
No, I'm not a novel reader. I mean, I read novels by my friends because they write them, and I always enjoy them. But I don't seek out novels, and I've never had the desire to write a book. I've helped on a few. I enjoy the process, but I'm too lazy, I think, is what my problem is.
No, okay. Well, I don't think anyone can call you lazy. You've probably written like millions of words throughout your career.
I've
Written more words than you spoke.
Yeah, that may be true. I've written quite a few. I've been writing since 1985 professionally, and that's a long time. And it's been a great run. There's nothing that I look back on that I would change or alter. Somebody once asked me if I had to live my life over again the same exact way, if I would do it, and I, in a heartbeat, 100%.
Really?
Oh yeah,
That's
100%.
I guess the technology's been a massive shift. My mum was a typist, and I grew up. In 1980, I was born, so I saw her with this big black, typewriter that made a lot of noise, and with these Tipex strips. If you made a mistake.
Right.
So now, obviously, you can talk into the thing, can't you now, and it'll write it for you. So technology must have been like advanced big time for kind of you in what you do.
It's amazing. I marvel today at like Chat GPT. You can say, "Hey, Chat, write me this," and boom, it comes out. Like I don't always like it, but it's amazing that I think it's great. I think it's great. I mean, obviously there's huge pitfalls that people have to watch out for, but I think it's awesome that it's advanced to this and it's made information so much more accessible to people.
It should be used as an aid, shouldn't it? Not the be all and end all. It should be used to aid you.
100%. Yes.
So you say now, you say like what you're doing nowadays. That was one of my questions. So you're a freelance writer, and you get commission work, I guess. Someone says, "Can you write something on X?" and then you say yes or no, and then you get your money and you write it, type of thing. Is that right?
Yeah, I have a couple of clients that I work directly with. I'm down to 2 clients now, and I like them very much. And I do the majority of work for one client, which is a university, and then another client, which is like a kind of a newsletter, e-newsletter kind of thing. And I enjoy it very much. It's very chill. Not a lot of drama. At my age, I don't need it. And I'm just very happy that that I had the career that I had, that I was able to do, because the career that I had doesn't exist anymore. You wouldn't do what I did today because there would be no point in it. It's, what does the Jimmy Buffett song say? My occupational hazard is my occupation isn't around anymore. Yeah. So I'm grateful that I was able to do what I did, and it got me here, and I love my clients. I love what I do. I love where I live. Yeah, it's all good. It's all good.
I think that's part of the interest. A small part of the interest is the fact that it is a bygone era, really, like you've just outlined the last several minutes. It's not something that people are... Well, they are doing it today, but it's a totally different form, and, like the written word page newspapers aren't as popular, obviously, with the advent of social media. etc., etc. And you're very modest as well when you say, saying, oh, I don't know if my story is very interesting. Your story's fascinating. But then I suppose when people live that story in this day to day to day, like they see it as their normal life and there's nothing remarkable about it. But a lot of people, I'm sure my viewers will feel the same, when they're looking in from the outside, like, wow, that guy's got some story, like really. You don't think an average person's had your the sort of stuff that you were involved in. Yeah, it hasn't.
Well, I was lucky. I worked in 3 very different industries, and all of them had like huge benefits. Like airlines, I got to fly around the world for next to nothing. Television, worked in television, worked in newspapers. Well, I actually, and I was actually a teacher too. I taught at 2 universities in Miami. So I've worked and I'm not trying to downplay it, because trust me, it's been awesome. And I know I've been very lucky. And I think a lot of people would love to have the experiences that I've had. But in the grand scheme of things, it's just, it's been my life. And I'm glad that you've taken an interest in letting me share my story. I really appreciate that. Not a lot of people ask, and I don't volunteer. So unless you ask me, I'm probably not going to tell you much of anything.
No, it's a pleasure. It has been an absolute pleasure. It's been a thrill to listen to your stories. Just a couple more questions, because I know you're very generous with your time. You probably want to get off and celebrate with fireworks or barbecues or whatever you want to do on Independence Day.
Some American kind of thing.
Yeah, you can't tell I'm bitter about it, can you? No. 200, 300 years later, it still etches on my soul. What are your plans for the future? Your hopes and plans for the future?
I'm just, I'm looking forward to retirement. I love what I do. I mean, it's not like I'm working hard now. I think really what it's come down to is I just want to try to make my little corner of the world as good for myself and for anybody who happens to enter it. That's my hope for the future. That's really all I can do. I can't do anything about what's going on in the world. It's crazy, but it's always been crazy. I mean, it was nuts when I was growing up, and it's nuts now, and it's not going to change. So I just focus on trying to make sure that that whoever I come into contact with, it's a pleasant experience, whatever I have to do to make that happen. Because that kind of, outlook has gotten me a long way, and I see no reason to abandon it now. So I don't have any big plans. I don't need to travel. There's actually, honestly, there's no place left that I want to go that I haven't already been. And I'm very, very lucky to be able to say that. A lot of people can't say that.
Favorite place you've ever been?
Vietnam.
Wow, really?
Yeah. I fell in love. I absolutely fell in love with that place. Been there like 5 times, I think. I've been really lucky. So it's not like I want to retire so I can travel. I want to retire so I don't have to travel. I don't want to go anywhere. I like where I live.
Isn't that funny? Because most people are the opposite. They want to retire and they want to travel and see the world. Where you've seen the world, now you're just like, I just want to chill out now.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, and I'm very lucky. I feel very lucky for that, because honestly, traveling these days is a freaking nightmare. I mean, compared to what I was used to when I was first in the industry, I mean, it is. I mean, it's bad. It's difficult, and I find it very stressful, and I don't enjoy it the way that I used to. So I'm glad when I look at the list, they're all crossed off. So I'm good to go.
That's amazing. I remember one of my friends went travelling, and he travelled Vietnam. I remember him telling me a story that he travelled across Vietnam to get somewhere. I think he stayed in Vietnam for a little bit, and went across to go somewhere like Cambodia or something. I think that's somewhere near, isn't it? And he was on a bus. He took a bus, so he kind of slummed it, if you know what I mean. He didn't have any luxury travel. And he said that there was no suspension on this bus, and it was a hard wooden seat. And he said he'd been never in so much pain in his life than travelling across Vietnam. Like, it sticks with me, that story. But do you like Vietnam because of, like, is it the people, is it the culture, is it the landscape? What is it, or the historical element of Vietnam? What is it?
Yes to all of those. My interest initially was because I grew up with the Vietnam War as a backdrop. I mean, every night after swim practice, we'd watch the news, and that was the lead, how many body count. And so I'm like, all these places, you heard Hue, Da Nang, I always wanted to go there. And I actually organized a war tour, and I met people who are still my friends to this day. That was like 15 years ago that I first went. And then I keep going back to see them. And it's just beautiful. And they've actually, I think their buses are a little bit better these days. But they had a rough time. I mean, they actually call the period between 1976 and like the mid 90s the hard time, because that's when they had no allies. Yeah, they've been through a lot, but I still have dear friends that live there. I talked to one of them 2 days ago. And so everything about it. If you ever get a chance to go, it's 100% worth it. It's one of the most beautiful countries I've ever been.
Wow, that's fascinating. I don't suppose you've been to North Korea, have you?
No, I have not, but I've been to Korea. But I've never been to North Korea. I never wanted to go, to be perfectly honest with you.
It's not like you can get your pen and paper out and start sketching some things in North Korea, is it? You'd be in big trouble.
No, that's not a place I wanted to go. Not ever. Like I said, there's a lot of places I haven't been, but that's because I haven't wanted to go there. Every place that I've said, I really want to see that, or I want to be a part of that, or I want to experience that, I've been lucky enough to be able to do it.
That's amazing. That's really cool. If anyone wants to find you, or indeed if you want them to find you, where can people find you? If you don't want them to find you, just say, no, I'm just chilling.
Well, I mean, people can reach out to me. My email address is out there. Zillions of people have it. I'm totally okay if someone wants to reach out for me for any reason. I'm not, I'm pretty settled, and I'm happy being left alone, but I don't, if someone wants to talk about something and there's a genuine interest, I would be happy to chat with anybody. All they have to do is email me, and that's fine. They can reach me that way if they really want to.
Okay.
Thanks for giving me the option. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I was thinking, like, everybody else I've chatted to, I've interviewed, they always keen to, contact me here, go to Instagram, I don't know, here's my YouTube channel, buy a book. And when I was asking that question, I was thinking, is he even wanting people to contact him? He just want to be left alone.
Well, I kind of do, but like I said, for the reason that, obviously, Ram spoke highly of you, and when we talked, you seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. And to me, if you're genuinely interested, I'll talk to you all day. But most people, to be perfectly honest, aren't. They've got so much going on. I understand it. It's fine. But that's why I don't do, I have accounts on social media, I think Facebook and Instagram and the X or whatever it's called now, but I don't use them. I haven't used them in probably 8 or 10 years. They're there. I just have never deleted them, but I don't look at them. I don't use them. I don't follow social media. It's just not part of my life. It hasn't been for many, many years. And I've found that I'm a lot happier that way.
I can see that. Yeah.
So I stick with it. But if someone is genuinely interested in talking to me about anything, I'm more than happy to give them as much time as they want, if that's what they really want to know.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again, Jon, for your time and your patience and your amazing stories. And we see you're being modest, aren't you? They're amazing stories. But no, I really appreciate your time again, and I wish you well with everything, and hopefully our paths will cross in the not too distant future.
I would like that. I would like that. If I find something, I'm checking out what you're doing. And if I find something I think might interest you, I mean, I'm always up to send a story or an idea or something like that. And I've really appreciated talking with you. As I said, having someone genuinely interested in what I'm doing and my life and the things that I've experienced is unusual. And it's been an enjoyable afternoon, and I wouldn't have wanted to spend it any other way, 4th of July or not.
Thank you very much. Just don't invite me on any tour of the Everglades, will you? Because I'll politely decline you on that one.
If we go, we'll take a gun, okay? Just so we both feel
yes. Hey, we don't have guns in the UK, or very few cops do. I've never even seen a gun in my life, so I wouldn't know what to do with one.
Well, if we went to the Everglades, we would take one just to be on the safe side.
I take it a baseball bat wouldn't work. With some stones in my pocket.
No, you got to get too close to them for that.
Oh, yeah. Don't want to do that. All right, mate. Well, thank you so much, and appreciate everything. And hopefully we'll catch up soon.
I'm looking forward to it. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Rob. Have a great evening, and thanks again for everything. It's been awesome to be here.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. Take care, bud.
All right. Bye-bye.
Cheers then. Bye.